Welcome to the EWTN Great Britain podcast with me, your host, Peter L. Jones. Sam, I hope you and our listeners enjoyed the very regal music for today is a very special feast day. The sound of a feast day for many Catholics.
We're not going to want to talk about anything now.
No.
We're just going to sit here and drink beer and eat chocolate.
Some Christian denominations consider alcohol sinful, but not the church, not the Catholic Church.
No, my mother's family were Methodist. So I well remember at Christmas time, the only nod my grandfather would give to alcohol was a glass of ginger wine, but it had to be sweetened with a spoonful of sugar. It was essentially a toddy, but that was about it, as far as he went.
What do they make of the wedding feast of Cana in your own time? No rush.
Well, probably not a lot, to be honest.
We have a Mormon base near where we live. I do respect their courage going round, but they say it was fruit juice. I do not buy that for 1 second.
Very unlikely, isn't it?
As if a load of Jews would be amazed that water had been turned into fruit juice. Big deal.
Doesn't have quite the same impact, does it?
So, yeah. You could have just added cordial of some kind.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Hardly a miracle.
Literally dilutes the whole message.
Oh, very good, Sam. I like that. Very quick. So we're here with Sam for episode 6. Sam, I'll let you kick off.
One of the things that I wanted to refer back to from some of our previous podcasts actually is a regular quote, looking to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. This sense that there is an element of exploration that needs to be undertaken, particularly with reference to the truth, the Catholic truth, and also perhaps connected to ourselves as men. We like to go off on adventure and explore, hunt for the truth, the Holy Grail, as it were. One author that I read would mention another author, and I've always been grateful for that sense of following the White Rabbit. That, of course, comes from Alice in Wonderland, the White Rabbit, and Alice follows the rabbit. It's not just Alice in Wonderland, but the more modern interpretation that we've had through the film of The Matrix. Great film. The main character, he's told by a stranger, a strange voice, to look for the White Rabbit, and he rather dismisses it. And at one point when he opens his front door to respond to a knock on the door, there's a bunch of his friends standing outside, and as one of them turns around to go away, he notices on the back of her shoulder a tattoo of a white rabbit. And it makes him jump. He's been told to follow this white rabbit, and lo and behold, even though he dismissed the command, as it were,
off he goes.
There was one. And that, yes, it absolutely sets him off. This sort of search almost comes to its conclusion where he meets this otherworldly character, Morpheus. Morpheus says, "This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends, you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more."
Sam, you could have got the part.
And but that, I remember, struck me at the time. And for those who haven't seen the film and don't know the references to the blue pill and the red pill, it's the choice that Morpheus gives Neo, the character, to take the blue pill, to return back to his old world and to forget whatever happened. Or he takes the red pill and a new world is opened up to him, a world that he may not like, and it might be very unpalatable when he wakes up in it, but at least it's real.
Yeah.
Yes, and true. Unfortunately, this notion of taking the red pill has moved somewhat negatively into common parlance, being red-pilled or having taken the red pill, yet certainly is a nod to uncovering uncomfortable truths that one had never realised were there before. But it has moved rather into an online community hosted on Reddit, I think called The Red Pill, where it lets men complain about women. And it's one of the things that they, I think, believe, and I've not really explored this particular rabbit hole, is that waking up to the truth, having taken the red pill, waking up to the truth, is that in fact it is women who run the world and rule the world, and that men are much maligned, and that we are actually underneath the rule of women and we don't actually know.
You can see the grievances going on in today's world. The man's role has been undermined by feminist theory and all those kind of things. and they're taking the wrong path. I suppose I would say their gripe is a failure of men to act and respond to the call of God or God's natural law. This would not be a problem had they done that, or had our predecessors done that.
And that is the line that Catholic men should take, that we've talked about this before, that men have a role, and part of that role is a protective role. Part of that protective role is to protect the family, to protect the relationship between man and woman, husband and wife. It's also, I think, to protect women and family from ourselves, from our indolence, from our inertia, from our anger, from our lusts, from our laziness, from our own concerns and wishes, that we need to be very careful before we start blaming women for anything if we haven't yet looked at ourselves and those things that we should be doing as men.
I think you often mention this, why it's hard to see past most of the world's problems are a failure of men to accept their responsibilities for their actions.
Yeah.
Peeling back the can slightly, and already all these worms are pouring out. Relationships, marriages, all those things come back to, can the man accept responsibility for his actions?
You opened up our last podcast with reference to Adam, and I think we can despair about Adam, and in that despair about ourselves. If we go back to that story in the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve are created on the sixth day, you then wonder, at what point in that creation story did Satan approach? Was it then, immediately, as the woman is created? And is Satan standing there right there and then, waiting to attack this woman?
You say that. I've heard a talk where they say Satan went after the woman to undermine the natural order of the man being the head of the house, the man being in charge. That's how it was undermined from the beginning.
And what does he then offer Eve? He says, you will be like gods. Well, what woman does not want to be treated like a goddess? And if we remember, she was created as Adam's helpmate, and we don't talk too much about this because it sounds terrifically sexist, but rather than being seen as a helpmate, how much more delightful is it to be seen as a goddess? And that was what Satan was offering her. And you're right, it then undermines the order of creation. God, our God, God the Father, and he's then created Adam to lead the family, and Eve to be there to help him do so. Now, what was Adam doing? I half wonder whether it was actually on the day of rest. God rested, so Adam rested. And in that rest, maybe Adam took his eye off the ball. He was too easy. He had his creation, his kingdom that God had created, with all the good food in it that God had laid out.
Polish beer, tasty chocolate.
Yeah, that's right. He had his woman, and perhaps he then took it too easy. He took his eye off the ball. And maybe that's what we as men have been in danger of doing. Not necessarily in danger, we've actually done. We talked in our last podcast about King Theoden sitting inert in his throne, being filled with all these wily words about how wonderful he is by Wormtongue. And maybe that's what we have allowed ourselves to do and to become as men.
I suppose that's what narcissism does to you, Sam. You're such a great guy, the self, the great I am.
Yeah.
Because that's what Wormtongue is saying to him, isn't it? I forgot about that. You're right.
Yeah, exactly how wonderful you are.
He's kind of happy to hear it.
He is, yes, yeah. And what it's done is drowned out the sound of the commands from God about protecting his creation, protecting his family. A few interesting things that come out from that is we talked about one of the messages from Fatima being about the final battle between Christ and Satan will be over marriage and the family. More precisely, the final battle within that may well be over the woman being the battleground. Are we prepared to step in and defend the sanctity of womanhood? The woman who becomes the tabernacle for new life.
When you say the tabernacle there, we think, that's a good metaphor for the metal tabernacle we see at Mass. But it's the other way around, really.
Yes.
The metal tabernacle is a good metaphor for the actual tabernacle, which is the womb of Our Lady. Adam, immediately after the fall, they see each other for what they are, kind of naked. They must have been naked anyway. But they're ashamed, aren't they? And I think that's got some, don't know what the language, I often say this, don't know what the language is, but we ought to find out. Porn does that, doesn't it? Porn is, even among non-religious, a lot of men will say, well, it's a shameful act, or it's something to be embarrassed of, or even if you see kind of headlines in papers, wife or girlfriend finds out boyfriend has been masturbating, it's just known to be a shameful act. But porn as well is a kind of, I want knowledge of this thing that by God's law I do not have rights to this. And it's the same with that tree of knowledge. This was out of bounds, not yours to know. And I think there's some bounds there. And if men are to sort themselves out, they've got to get onto chastity. And a big deal is made of chastity more than other virtues.
Yeah.
And I think if we're going to get back to God and get onto God's mission, we've got to sanctify ourselves and, I don't know how you would say it really, but make reparation for that sin of wanting that. They say carnal knowledge, don't they, in the kind of old-fashioned language. But
it is, and it's always...
We've got to get off the appetite for porn and for that thing of the woman, that's the beauty of the woman that is not for us.
It's interesting that our conversation very much comes back to these kinds of themes because I think they are central. And we've talked about the tabernacle, and we've made the association with Our Lady and with women bearing children, bearing new life. And as you talked about, the physical tabernacle in our churches that holds the life of the body of Christ. And we cannot really separate the two. Our Lady was the first ever tabernacle, bringing new life into the world. If we, as men, are meant to represent the fatherhood of God, women too must represent the motherhood of Our Lady, and that elevates women.
Once you become a Catholic, Sam, I think we have mentioned this before. Are you an Novus Order Catholic or are you a trad Catholic? Do you listen to this priest or do you listen to that priest? And you kind of say, well, look, just listen, You don't really care for you kind of enter into a world of, it seems quite polemic, what kind of Catholic are you, which I wish I didn't give us.
But I know where you're going with this.
Yeah.
You pick up your information where you find it.
You give this talk, it's very fascinating kind of reflection, that on earth, the man is the head of the household, so men rule. Yet this is the most upsetting language to feminists, but look, that's God's law. Our Lady is the highest, I don't know how you phrase it technically, but the highest human creature, higher than St. Joseph, who was the head of that family, even though he's kind of the smallest player in that situation.
And yet she's Queen of Heaven.
Queen of Heaven, yeah. So to say that all of this is some kind of misogynist, controlling, we're not going to go into that debate. Simply to say that if you think that is the case, your tail is still sticking out of the rabbit hole, and only your feet are in it.
It's something I think that we need to explore further, and the rabbit hole is a good analogy for it. This notion that as men and as leaders and as heads of our family, we're not subjugating our women. We're not.
Not at all.
We are there to
serve.
To, let's say, I mean, because I'm not an expert on this, but in the loosest terms,
we're both married, aren't we?
reverence, to elevate. We're not putting them up on a pedestal, because I think there's a danger, isn't there? And this is what pornography does, that it puts women out there as something that is to be appropriated. I have seen another meme, I'm very good with my memes, but you know that one that shows the evolution of man from monkey to upright. And then often people will tack on a further regression of perhaps a man bowing down in front of a computer, or hunched over a computer, just to show that we're regressing back into beast mode. Well, the most obnoxious one that I actually saw was that evolution of crouched down ape to upright man, to then finally regressing to another crouched down individual, but it was a man kneeling in front of a naked and pornographic woman. And that is the danger, that we allow ourselves to pretend that we are worshipping women, we're worshipping the female body. No, we should be reverencing our women in the way that we reverence the tabernacle at church, and in the way that we reverence our Blessed Mother.
I might just say on that point, there was at the men's conference a very funny comment from one of the people that was listening. I don't know what the root of his concern was, but we're saying words to the effect of, and I have to watch, modesty is demanded here. St. Joseph's marriage to Our Lady was not the same as all the other marriages that go on, because maybe they slept in separate beds, let's say it like that.
I'd like to think they didn't.
don't think they did. Yeah, sure.
But it wasn't consummated in the way that we physically understand.
It did have a point that we don't treat our wives like we treat our lady in that respect. But nevertheless, it did have a good point, and this is something where we're still called to chastity in the marriage.
Yes, and treating our wives with great honour and dignity.
Yeah, and this is what the church is on about, really.
And I think I mentioned this in my own talk at the conference back in November. I researched, as I was trying to understand a bit more about the tabernacle, but in the sort of Jewish religious custom, the high priest could only enter the Holy of Holies, I think, once a year. And he had to be purified, he had to be clean before he could enter the veil into the Holy of Holies, to the extent that a rope was tied around his waist, and outside of the Holy of Holies the other end was held onto, because if he was not pure, if he was unclean and went in, he would be struck down dead. No one else could go in and pull him out because they too were unclean and would be struck down dead. So they'd have to pull him out on the end of a rope. That notion of needing to be ritually clean before you can enter the veil to the Holy of Holies, we could take as some kind of analogy for our own honour of our wives. Let's say, take the bedroom as the temple, the bed as the Holy of Holies. We cannot enter into that environment unclean, impure, with impure thoughts, with lustful thoughts of our wives. We need to enter that veil clean and purified. Now that would suggest perhaps, well, first of all, that we go to confession, but perhaps that we also pray with our wife before we go to bed, pray with her before the sexual act takes place. This is something, in fact, that Scott Hahn
does he?
says.
I've not heard him talk about this.
And when I first heard it, I thought, blimey, okay. But he actually says, to some extent, this should stop us as men, particularly unmarried men, or married men who are thinking of straying, that if we were to see a comparison between the sexual act within the marriage and the Eucharist, we would treat the marriage act with the same liturgical sensibilities as we do
as this guy going in
the Eucharistic act,
right?
And the Jewish high priest going into the Holy of Holies. So you should think about it. If you were thinking of
a tough one for the doctor. What's the cause of death here? Well, my husband was just struck down
because he was impure. If we knew that, if we taught that to our sons, they would think twice about leaping into bed with just some random girl, because hang on a minute, Dad said we need to say a prayer before we do this. Well, that would chase off any girl that was thinking about just a one-night stand. But I think that is the level of reverence that we need to take.
The level of language as well that we should be talking about this. I don't know what I would say to, we mustn't have lustful thoughts about our wives.
St. Paul does talk about, doesn't he, marriage helping us as men to overcome those physical needs and requirements. Someone
challenged whether sex is a need or a desire. Well, it's a need insofar as the human race is concerned. Of course it is a desire.
I think the danger is that, let's say that my only physical interaction with my wife was to go up and grab her backside. I can't wait to jump into bed with you. The only thing I can think about all day is how beautiful your body is. Well, what message is she getting? That I just objectify her? I think that's when I say not lusting after our wives, I find her beautiful. I want to get into bed with her.
Sure.
Because she attracts me physically.
We can't get around that language. Do you want to get into bed? The way I think about it is, well, they might be quite pleased with the attention or the praise, which would be genuine. That language counts massively if you're faithful. If there is no other woman, and nor has there been in your life, well...
And just read the Song of Songs.
Yeah, you can say
the language in the Song of Songs. It's very erotically charged.
And you can say those things to your wife because they are real and they mean something, because you're not thinking about another. I think the chastity is... Maybe wrong in saying this, but the chastity is in you've got eyes for no other woman. No other woman gets your attention, and it's reserved solely for your own wife.
And I think we need to also remember this sense of veiling. It is just between us, between you, my wife, and me, your husband. And part of the need for the man to play his protective role is to, rather like St. Joseph, keep a silent veil over domestic life. And it's interesting that hymn, isn't it? Thou within the veil hast entered, robed in flesh, our great high priest. You know, robed in flesh.
Not heard that.
Yeah, it's a great old hymn. That sense that, yes, we can, as men, as husbands, robed in our own flesh, enter the veil, and it is a veil. And by the way, just a slight digression, who was it who said, I can't remember now, but we veil that which is sacred. And I think this was perhaps something that I read when I was reading an article about women veiling at church. And again, was that another, subjugating the woman? Why should the woman veil? But we veil that which is sacred.
Sacred, yeah. Yeah, like you're saying, this is our language. This is our traditional language that we've got to reclaim.
And I think if we then take it back, let's roll back to this notion of the red pill and men being upset that women are ruling the world and so on. It's a twisted and perverse understanding of the dignity that we give to women, the elevation that we must give to women. But you're right, feminism has come in and has destroyed that notion that men are there to elevate women to a place of sanctity in a way.
Slowly, we don't even know, confident Catholics, what should be confident Catholics, don't even know what's their own or what's the way to express their mission and things. We might reject feminism, obvious militant feminism, we might reject that, but we're kind of not quite sure what to make of all these more subtle attacks on our God-given missions and states in life.
That's right, and I think where we've talked a lot about going down the rabbit hole, we need to have the courage to jump down any number of rabbit holes and go, what do I need to find out? What do I need to understand as a man about my role as a man and my role in relation to the woman?
Like you say, we don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to be living
we're
a
going to
life
make some
where
mistakes. Certainly.
We are, but we don't want to be like say, how should I be thinking about my wife and how should she be thinking about me and all this? We don't want to get it wrong. We want to sanctify our lives. Again, I've read somewhere as well, heard I don't want to give it too boring a term, but I don't want to be too explicit either, Sam. So what should we say? In the temple of the bedroom, when things are pure and chaste, that this is a huge channel of grace into our lives. When we get our marriages right, it's not a kind of sullied act that Catholics have to do for the perpetuation of the human race.
Just think of Monty Python.
It's not. God is pleased and God bestows graces on the good marriage as he will bestow graces on the good priest or the good nun. If we might say a bit for modesty as well, because that's taken a kicking in pop culture and certainly movies. The modest girl is some repressed sexual creature, or if she's not repressed, she's so boring you must avoid her, or something like that. But in fact, modesty is the best thing we've got, keeping a lid on those very strong desires in us that could lead us to temptation. It's keeping a lid on our very strong feelings for each other and the beauty that we inherently possess as men and women.
Well, this is a topic where we're in danger of a very harsh backlash from feminists because...
But it cuts both ways. A lot of this language applies to both. And I would say to anyone that wants to attack it, how a society that has cast off modesty, how's that fared? Not great.
That's right.
Certainly in terms of marriages and children being raised.
I do think, and this is anecdotal talking to the Catholic women that I know and trust, that they don't actually, they being women, our women folk, realise how or what a visceral physical response takes place outside of our control when we see a woman like...
It sounds like you've raised a massive point. Feeling with porn is the man's day could be going fine. Yeah, doing great. Productive, blah, blah. You kind of know what's coming. Every man kind of knows what's coming in, don't they?
And you see a bit of flesh.
It's just... And of course, the culture will say, well, can you not control yourself? Blah, blah, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
I kind of liken it to the boiler. When you turn on the hot tap, if the boiler's in the same room, you kind of hear that woof of the flames start. You can't see the flames, they're out of sight, and it's that deep, and the flames kick off, and it's not visible on the outside. And it's that kind of thing that can kick off the imagination. That's where the virtuous man steps in and is right, okay. But the boiler's been kicked off, but I'm not going to respond to it.
Oh, absolutely. That is the right response. And I think I was talking to Catholic women that I trust about this, one of them being one of my sisters. She had some very difficult relationships with young men. I can't remember if they were Catholic or not, where it kind of led to difficult situations where something physical might happen and she was really resisting it and they were really pushing for it. And it made her very, very upset. And she would admit she took a feminist line on it. You know, these awful men who can't control themselves.
Which got a point.
Yes, and she did have a point. She had a very strong point, and she was very upset and very angry. And I say we had a conversation about it. We had an argument about it. But then I said to her at some point, it might not have even been that initial conversation, but it was later, I think. And I said, look, sister, I won't give her name, but don't you realise what the response is deep inside me? Like you mentioned, this flame that gets switched on simply by seeing a woman less than modestly clothed, or whatever situation it might be,
you want to put on.
And how much self-control I have to have not to let my thoughts go down a particular route, which then would lead to actions going down a particular route. I said, it's nothing I have control over until I decide to take control. And she, I think, was taken aback by that.
Grace is the ace in the hole. Once the enemy starts appearing on the hill, our act of the will is to play the ace. I'm sure there's billions of men across the globe that will testify. You cannot beat this by your own strength. At best, you're outnumbered and outmuscled, and it gets worse from there. Your own body rebels against it. Your own body turns on you. Your imagination turns on you. When you're trapped in the snares of porn, you think there's no way you're ever getting out. But when you're out of it, the miracle of getting out, being free, you know God is real. And there's no going back from that. That reality, the knowledge you have.
That's right. Doing this work with Catholic Man UK, I've really been very hesitant about telling guys what we think the woman ought to do. I think this is where it sort of needs to come in form of relationship and is best worked out in the intermarital relationship between the man and the woman and how their roles interact. And so I have made it a point not to say on Catholic Man UK, men, we ought to be doing this, but our women ought to be doing this. Made an absolute point, because I'm not going to go down that misogynistic red pill line at all. But one thing I perhaps would ask from our women folk is somehow to give us some sense of understanding that you know how difficult it is for us physically.
Sam, always good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you once again.